Nope. Well, it's complicated. Nintendo Switch Online is Nintendo's paid online service for the Switch, the successor to the Nintendo Network and the competitor to PlayStation Network and Xbox Live. Since its announcement in early 2017, it's been a subject of great controversy. Playing games on Nintendo consoles had previously been free, and now we're expected to pay for it? To be honest, I think more people should have seen this coming. Microsoft unfortunately started the trend of consoles charging users for playing online with the original Xbox, and Sony followed in their footsteps with the launch of the PS4. It was inevitable that Nintendo would jump on eventually. So they did. During the Nintendo Switch press conference in 2017, Nintendo revealed the service to the disappointment of many. However, there was still hope that this could still end up being a good thing overall. Nintendo has never been known for their amazing online services previously. Xbox and PlayStation both had features like messaging, party systems, voice chat, and game invitations, which are now seen as pretty basic online gaming standards. Nintendo, on the other hand, was missing some of these, with the others being done in a clunky way or inconsistently. For example, on the Wii U, you could video call friends, but only in a specific app which can't be opened at the same time as any games. Certain games could support voice chat, but how it works depended on what they decided for each game. So in games like Smash Bros and Mario Kart, you could talk to your friends while in the lobby, but not while actually playing for some reason. The Wii U did have Miiverse, which was pretty cool, sometimes, and allowed you to message your friends in a more convenient way than back on the Wii. The 3DS also had Miiverse, but you couldn't message friends through it, and friends had to be added through randomly generated friend codes, rather than your custom username. See what I mean about inconsistency? So, while there was of course disappointment that Nintendo was charging for online now, there was definitely hope that they would finally get with the times and provide a modern, robust service like the other consoles did. They also promised us the now infamous Switch Online app for voice chat, as well as play appointments, and the fact that NES and SNES games would be available for subscribers to download. This was disappointing right from the start, as it implied that Virtual Console would not be returning to the Switch. At the time, while I was let down that Switch Online was going to be paid, the promise of basically anything new regarding the Switch was exciting. I was so used to how it all worked on the Wii U that the idea of a fresh, new, modern service would be quite appealing, and I'm sure others felt the same. However, this service was not going to be launching with the Switch, and was instead supposed to come out in autumn of 2017, but as we know, it didn't turn out like that, and it was delayed by an entire year. After the Switch had launched, the service didn't seem so promising anymore. It turned out that the Switch was even more bare bones in terms of social features than the Wii U and the 3DS, and Nintendo had taken a step back and opted for friend codes once again instead of usernames. And then there was the Switch Online mobile app. People don't really talk about it anymore, and for good reason. It's almost completely pointless, at least for its main intended purpose of being used for voice chat. The mini apps within it, like Splatnet and Nooklink, are actually pretty cool though. I've used Splatnet a decent amount when playing Splatoon 2 and 3, and it's quite helpful. As for the voice chat, I tried it once or twice with my friends before going right back to Discord calls. The only time it could be useful is in lobbies with randoms, and even that has to be in specific games and modes that support it. The thing is, basically no one uses it, and I'm not really interested in talking to one stranger every once in a while in a Mario Kart lobby. The promised play appointments never even showed up, which just adds insult to injury. On the positive side, the pricing of the service was going to be much cheaper than what other consoles were offering, at around £20 a year rather than $50. When Switch Online finally launched in September 2018, the main thing to look forward to was the classic game selection. Going a year and a half without any way to play Nintendo's classic games on the Switch was pretty disappointing. Nintendo was actually still releasing more games on the Wii U and 3DS Virtual Console into 2017, but nothing for the Switch, other than the Arcade Archives series, but I don't think that's what most people were after. The service launched with 20 NES games and nothing SNES related in sight. Compared to the launch of the Virtual Console on the Wii U, 3DS and Wii, this is actually quite similar, though you'd think that resetting every time is completely unnecessary. The selection of NES games that the service actually launched with was decent. You've got some iconic ones, the arcade ports like Donkey Kong and Mario Bros, most of the big games including Super Mario Bros, Super Mario Bros 3 and The Legend of Zelda. Strangely, there was a lack of Mario 2, Zelda 2 and, more notably, Metroid. Quite a few generic sports games were available for some reason, and I thought they were quite fun to play multiplayer in, even though they were way too simple. These games consistently came out in batches once a month, which sounds good in theory, but in practice, this is one of Switch Online's biggest issues, which I'll come back to later. These batches sometimes included special SP versions. They're just the original games with some modifications. You might start later into the game, or have extra modes unlocked, that kind of thing. For games like Super Mario Kart, it means that you can just play everything from the start, and for single player games it could mean starting with more stuff or having a higher difficulty unlocked, which can make the games feel more fresh, especially if you've already finished them before. On the emulation side, it's actually pretty good, with some notable improvements over Virtual Console. On the Wii U, Virtual Console games had this dark filter over them, which made the games look just objectively worse. Thankfully, they fixed this with the NES Online. I never actually thought anything of it when playing Virtual Console games before, but going back to them after playing on the Switch is quite noticeable, especially if you do a side-by-side comparison. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a trade-off when it comes to visuals, as Nintendo thought it would be a good idea to add a distracting border and UI elements surrounding the game screen. If I had to guess a reason for this, it would be so when people are watching gameplay online, they can recognize that it's on the Switch, and then go and buy Switch Online or something like that. These borders don't ruin the experience at all, and they're just a bit unnecessary, and the ability to turn them off would be nice. They did eventually add an option to hide the controls at the bottom, so clearly they acknowledge that it's distracting, but intentionally don't want the border to be gone. There was also no option to remap the controls in any game, and playing old games with a new controller can just feel off. Though this is more of a problem with later consoles than the NES. The button mapping update that eventually came to the Switch's software can help with this, but really I think this feature should be built into the classic games apps as well. The problem is that while you can save certain layouts for different controllers, you can't make presets for specific games, which would be ideal. And even if you could, you'd need to do it within the app anyway, because it contains a variety of games that control differently. Perhaps Nintendo made it intentionally difficult to encourage the sales of the Switch Online exclusive controllers. Who knows really. On the plus side, we did get the option to change the aspect ratio from 4:3 to pixel perfect, as well as the ability to add a CRT filter. These originated from the NES and SNES mini consoles, and I'm so glad they brought them over to the Switch. Restore points returned from Virtual Console as well, meaning you can cheese your way through any game. I'm joking. A lot of NES games don't even have the option to save, so this is incredibly useful. I'll admit, I've only ever completed the original Super Mario Bros. Using restore points. And of course, the big new feature, online play. For the first time, you could officially play NES games online with friends. That's only with friends, but random matchmaking wouldn't really work well without having to remake parts of the games, so that's fair enough. Online play really helps sell this app as a great way to play NES games compared to Virtual Console, at least for me. It brings some new life into them. Normally when playing NES games alone, I don't stick around playing them for too long, but with the option to do multiplayer, it's just much more fun. While the NES app wasn't too bad, lots of people weren't too happy with the service as it launched. Considering online was free before, it basically felt like you were forced to pay for some NES games if you wanted to play online. And a lot of people don't care about NES games. I do agree that it was disappointing, and I think it would have gone down a lot better if the SNES games were available at launch, even if there were less games overall. NES games, while they can be fun, just haven't aged nearly as well as SNES games for the most part. Even nowadays, a bunch of games like Stardew Valley and Terraria opt for the 16-bit graphics of the SNES because it's a genuinely beautiful art style. So people were quite happy when the next year, the SNES games finally became available. It really shouldn't have taken so long. SNES games had been a promised feature from when Switch Online was first announced in January 2017. 20 games were available at launch, and I think the selection was more solid this time. The main things I saw people complaining about were the lack of Donkey Kong Country games, Earthbound, and Mario RPG. Other than the last one, they did eventually arrive as well, albeit a bit late. Sadly, Nintendo decided that monthly editions were no longer going to be a thing, and they would just add games when they felt like it. And it took 3 whole months before the next update. I think this update was received a lot better by people for the reasons I mentioned about SNES games before. It gave a whole lot more value to Switch Online, adding to the bonus features that Nintendo had been introducing through 2019. The app worked basically the same as the NES one feature-wise, including a new rewind feature that had been added to the NES app not long before. The wireless SNES controller that they made was pretty cool. It has 2 extra buttons that act as ZL and ZR triggers without changing the feel of the controller, so you can use it for a lot more games that don't require analog sticks. Retro fighting games and even modern 2D platformers work great with it, and the price of it isn't too bad either. I actually bought one and it works really nicely with games like Mario Maker 2. Nintendo had talked about trying to boost the appeal of Switch Online, and they attempted this with game vouchers. They cost £84 each, and allow you to buy any 2 games from a selection from the eShop, and the selection was made up of mostly first-party games, which means you're generally going to save around £16. If you get more expensive games like Breath of the Wild and Smash Bros together, you can save £36, which is quite a nice deal, at least for digital games. Weirdly, these were a limited time thing in America, and only came back for good at the beginning of 2023. It really seems kind of pointless to have gotten rid of them. I personally haven't used them since I mostly buy physical games, but if you're looking to download 2 of Nintendo's full price games, then it's a good option. Some other Switch Online bonuses include game-specific ones, like some free gear in Splatoon 2, and exclusive spirit boards and free coins in Smash Ultimate. These bonuses are pretty worthless. Sure, the online jersey looks cool, but it's not like there's a shortage of gear in the game, and I think a much bigger incentive for Splatoon players to get Switch Online is, the majority of the game being online multiplayer. Instead, these bonuses are just a bunch of small, meaningless things that add up and make it feel like you're getting more out of the service. That's not really a bad thing though, at least they're nice to have. Probably the most notable bonus feature is the 99 series of games. Tetris 99 was a very strange, but still very cool announcement when it was first revealed. I wouldn't really have expected Nintendo to jump on the Battle Royale trend, at all, though they did do it in a very Nintendo way. I'm not sure whether Nintendo wanted to make a Battle Royale game first, or an online Tetris game first, but Tetris was quite a good way to start the series. It's Tetris. Anyone can play it. Unless you really hate puzzle games, it's just a fun new thing that you can try out for free. The game isn't perfect though. I feel like the way that you attack other players isn't the most intuitive, and that could put some people off. But when you get into it, it's a great time, and games can get very tense towards the end. This game has still been receiving support, with new themes based on various games coming out occasionally through the Maximus Cups, so I assume it's been doing well. There was even some paid DLC for it, which just adds offline modes and local multiplayer. Not really worth it for me. The main game is enough, to be honest. I guess if you want a more complete Tetris game, it's fine. Super Mario Bros. 35 came next, which seems to have been a lot more well liked than Tetris 99. I didn't really get into it, unfortunately. It didn't quite hit the same way that Mario Royale did, though I'd love to give it another chance. Except that I can't, obviously, because it's been shut down forever. At least with Mario 3D All-Stars, physical copies of the game still exist, and I've seen them going around for decent prices, and on top of that, the games are pretty much the same as their original releases. Mario 35 on the other hand, was much more of a new game, even if it was just a remixed version of Super Mario Bros. I really don't get why they had to make it limited. In 3D All-Stars' case, the limited release was presumably meant to drive up sales in a short amount of time, but Mario 35 was a free bonus for a subscription service, so it doesn't really work the same way. Maybe it helped boost the number of new subscriptions for a while, but at least to me, it feels like it would have been more worth it to just keep it around, giving Switch Online more value overall. It's even more weird when the game that they replaced it with was Pac-Man 99. I think more people want to play a Mario game on a Nintendo console than Pac-Man. Hopefully it might come back in the future as Mario 99 or something. Pac-Man 99 did not go down as well as the other 2 games. I get the idea. It's an arcade classic everyone has heard of, and should theoretically be as fun and accessible as Mario and Tetris, but it just got so boring after a few games. There's only one maze, so every game just felt the same, whereas Mario 35 had different levels, and Tetris is just an endless replayable game, no matter what. I'm glad it exists, because at least it meant there was some kind of replacement for Mario 35, and I'm sure some people liked it, but clearly not enough, as it shut down last week as of making this video. Side note, while writing this, a superior looking Battle Royale Pac-Man was actually announced to be ported to the Switch, which could be another reason for the shutdown. Luckily, a replacement already arrived a few weeks before in the form of F-Zero 99. Now this game is something special, and a lot better than its predecessor. Unlike the other 3 games, where you're playing the same game simultaneously, but not actually interacting on the same screen, this is a proper Battle Royale version of the original F-Zero. The original game still feels quite good to play, and this game takes it even further. There are new mechanics, like the Skyway, which helps keep things balanced, while still requiring skill, and extra limited time modes that get cycled through, keeping things interesting. I don't really have any complaints, except for the fact that almost everyone always picks Mute City 1, and it gets a bit boring. That's not the game's fault though, and the recent update with more tracks has helped. It looks like this game is going to be supported for a while, and I'm all for it. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if this game is a way for Nintendo to see what kind of interest their player base has in F-Zero, or even to familiarize a new generation with the franchise in preparation for a new game, like Pikmin 3 Deluxe did. Overall, I think these 99 games are a fantastic addition to Switch Online. Unlike some of the other bonuses, they're actually worthwhile, and not just something small that makes you feel better about owning the service. Admittedly, it would be nice if there could be more than 2 at a time, but I'm sure F-Zero 99 isn't the last we're going to see from the 99 series. Finally, the other noteworthy bonus involved My Nintendo. My Nintendo has been quite underused since the Switch first came out, and it was cool to finally have some more integration between them. More missions were added, where you can earn platinum points by playing certain games on the legacy apps at certain times. You can spend these on anything on the My Nintendo store, or now use them to buy elements to make profile pictures for your Switch user. It's kind of fun to mess around with and make icons, though I'd like it if it allowed you to mix elements from different games together and use your Mii with the new backgrounds. For ages, people had been expecting Nintendo 64 games to come to Switch Online. It made sense that it would come after the NES and SNES games, but nothing showed up. Then, in 2021, rumours surfaced that Nintendo was planning on making a higher price tier for Switch Online, with N64 games included in that. As we know, these rumours turned out to be true, and the expansion pass was revealed and released. It included the rumoured Nintendo 64 games, as well as Sega Genesis games, and the newly announced DLC for Animal Crossing. The Nintendo 64 game selection was not the largest, with only 9 games. You get the most iconic ones as usual: Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Star Fox, and some Mario spin-offs, among others. So while I think more would have been much better, it wasn't terrible. And anyway, they promised some more notable games would eventually come, including Majora's Mask, Kirby 64, and Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo getting into Smash made this less surprising than it would be otherwise, but this was the first time Banjo-Kazooie had ever been re-released on a Nintendo console, so there were some good choices on there, but the quality of the emulation was not the best. When N64 Online launched, there were issues with frame rate, input lag, a certain mode in Mario Kart required an N64 memory pack, and some graphical issues as well. I remember hearing a lot about how the fog in games like Ocarina of Time was mostly gone. Some people might actually prefer this, being able to see further into the distance, but it does take away a lot of the atmosphere that the fog created, and it was usually made to cover up stuff that isn't supposed to be seen by the player. Another graphical issue was reflections just not appearing in the Ocarina of Time water temple. While some of these issues might seem small, it just shows a lack of care and polish that went into emulating these games. It's like they rushed it, but it took over 4 years to get these games on Switch, and there had already been delays to Switch Online prior. It's not really acceptable. As far as I know, these issues have now been fixed, but they shouldn't have been there in the first place. Given Nintendo's recent dedication to not rushing the release of their games, I don't know why they didn't take the same approach with this. They delayed Tears of the Kingdom by a whole year just so they could polish it, and they didn't even give the Mario Wonder developers a deadline, and both of these games turned out great. They should have done the same with the N64 expansion pack, and then maybe it wouldn't have such a negative public image. The Genesis app launched with 14 games in total. I'm not very familiar with the Genesis, so I'm not sure how good the selection actually was. But apparently, many of the games had already released on the Switch in collections on the eShop. There was one big omission though, being the original Sonic the Hedgehog. That's like not including Super Mario Bros. On the NES app. Sonic 2 was there, but Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles weren't there either. 30 additional games later, and there's still no sign of them. Sonic Pinball was added, so clearly they have some strange priorities. The reason is probably to get you to buy the Genesis collection on the eShop, and now Sonic Origins too. Still, it's weird that they chose to have the second game over the first. For a lot of people, the wireless controllers that they made for these consoles were a lot more necessary than the last ones. The controls really did feel quite awkward for certain games using the Switch controllers. That's not the Switch's fault, but it does once again highlight the need for better button mapping. These new controllers are pretty cool again. The N64 controller should be usable with even more games than the SNES one, thanks to its analog stick, ZR, screenshot and home buttons, and it even has built-in rumble, which the original didn't. It's also the first time that the Nintendo 64 controller had been remade. The NES and SNES controllers were remade already for the NES and SNES Classic Mini. A cool feature about these was that they could be plugged into a Wii remote and be used on the Wii U. I'm still kind of disappointed that we never got an N64 Mini. That would have been awesome. The ultimate one would be a GameCube Mini though, and I could see them both selling quite well. However, I don't think either are likely anymore, with the Switch selling so well on its own, unlike the Wii U. Alright, back on topic. Having a Sega controller made and sold by Nintendo is just cool, and probably really weird for people who grew up with the Genesis. To be honest, I don't see the point in having these controllers exclusive to Switch Online members. There's plenty of games on the eShop that can use them, like the classic Sega collections or Doom 64. The Animal Crossing DLC was pretty cool, and I think it would have been the thing that pushed a lot of people over the edge to pay for the expansion pass. The idea of making a Happy Home Designer sequel within New Horizons is a great idea, and it seems to have quite a substantial amount of content. Adding DLCs to a subscription is a great idea from Nintendo. I don't think that they would be happy about having full current gen games available like Sony and Microsoft do, so DLCs, especially the ones they've chosen for the service, are a good way to get people to keep their subscriptions so they don't lose the content. Even if they don't, there's a good chance that they'll still buy the DLC after unsubscribing. Before the expansion pass released, it was speculated that the price increase would range from $5 to $15 a year. Many people were not happy about hearing this, myself included. I think we'd all assumed that they'd be added to the base subscription. At least the price increase wouldn't be too bad. Or so we thought. But doubling the price? It seems ridiculous for what you're getting. Over in America, it was even worse, with a $30 increase, bringing it to 2.5 times the price. According to a leaker, Sega gets paid a lot for having their games on the service, which could be a reason for the high price. There would also be other licensing costs for games like GoldenEye and Banjo-Kazooie. But there is a solution to this. Don't have them on the service. I don't think anyone was asking for Genesis games on Nintendo's online service. And as I mentioned, there's already multiple collections of its games on the eShop. If this is the case, then I don't know why Nintendo chose to add it to the service, considering how much backlash the price got. Couldn't there be Game Boy Advance games available at launch instead? I gladly accepted the Mario Kart DLC when it was announced that it would be coming to the expansion pack. I thought that this really was a step in the right direction, as an easy way to add value to the service, and it gave me hope that perhaps we'll get more in the future, and if you have the expansion pack, buying DLC would be a thing of the past. The eventual addition of the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance was very welcome. Despite having the expansion pack, and thinking it needed lots more value, I was glad that the Game Boy was released on the base tier subscription. It definitely feels like they were distributed fairly between the tiers. Having Game Boy Color games included too is cool, as well as the ability to change between the original and color versions of certain games. As far as I know, there were no major emulation problems or anything like that, which shows that they've learned from their mistakes in the past. Unfortunately, the game selection was tiny this time. 10 Game Boy games, one of which was Japan exclusive, and only 6 Game Boy Advance games. There really should have been a good amount more for each, especially for the service that you're paying twice the price for. It's more excusable that the N64 app had less games at launch than the others. Those games are much bigger in scale than the NES and SNES games. You've got a whole extra dimension to work with, and it just makes things more complicated. But the Game Boy had Tetris and Game & Watch Gallery as 2 of its 10 games, along with other games with much smaller scopes than others in their franchises, including Metroid 2 and Mario Land 2. I also think that there should have been more of a priority to have multiplayer games available. This goes for all of the legacy game apps too, but it did feel especially disappointing to only have a couple available when they first came out. As I've said, online multiplayer is a big part of making these games feel fresh, and just not having many options is a bit of a letdown. It's called Nintendo Switch Online, not Nintendo Switch Virtual Console. That aside, the few games they did pick were pretty good. Minish Cap, Superstar Saga, Link's Awakening DX, and Kirby are all iconic must-haves. Other great games including Metroid Fusion and the Zelda Oracle games did come eventually. Apparently it's mandatory for there to be some weird omission from these apps though, as the first Super Mario Land was not and still isn't playable. And of course, possibly the most notable omission of all, Pokémon. The original mainline Pokémon games are the best-selling Game Boy games by far. It was a global phenomenon, 11 million sales above Tetris, and below that are the second generation games, which themselves are 11 million above 4th place. It seems crazy to not include them in a collection of Game Boy games. This would allow online multiplayer for the first time, and they could potentially connect to the Pokémon Stadium games in the N64 app, or even Pokémon Home. However, I'm not too surprised they weren't included. The Pokémon company likes to do things differently to Nintendo, and it took a weirdly long time until the first 2 generations were available on the 3DS Virtual Console. That, and the fact that the Switch already has Pokémon Let's Go, which is kind of a remake of Pokémon Yellow. Maybe they'll eventually release them on the eShop alone. I'm sure that would have a huge success, looking at other Pokémon games' sales. Some people have speculated they might be planned to come eventually after all, as an updated Switch Online trailer featuring the Pokémon Stadium games removed the previous disclaimer mentioning that you couldn't transfer Pokémon to those games. So maybe there's a chance. It would be cool if they release all of the mainline Pokémon games on Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. The 3DS eShop is down now, so you can't get them new anywhere anymore. So, is Switch Online finally worth it? It's been 5 years now since the initial launch of Nintendo Switch Online, and it's come along quite well since then. At launch, the amount of things that you got for the amount you were paying for was really not enough, but unfortunately that didn't matter. Most people were going to buy it regardless, because if you don't, you're losing out on the basic feature of online, which is used by most games. For most people, it's just an unfortunate necessity of playing games on consoles these days. Xbox and PlayStation have done it for years, and people have now just accepted it because there's no other real options for consumers here. Either you get the subscription, or you can't play the online games that you bought. So at the very least, Switch Online has always been far cheaper than its competitors. Really, I don't think any console should charge for online play. PC games and mobile games get on fine without it, and so did Sony and Nintendo until they realized they were missing out on free money. It's especially annoying in Nintendo's case, given the fact that most of their games use player-to-player connections rather than dedicated servers, so it's not costing Nintendo that much at all. And the quality of the online play varies greatly depending on the game. People talk about games having bad netcode, and apparently, Nintendo's overall online infrastructure is ancient. I don't doubt that one bit. Trying to play games like Smash Bros and Mario Maker without lag is impossible. At least they're supposedly planning to replace it. It's hard to say whether paying for online play is really worth it in general, but in this current situation where we have to, are they offering enough with the service? I think the answer would be that it's almost good enough. There's a great selection of games from across the NES, SNES and Game Boy, and it's a great way to play them with the extra features, as well as just looking better than they did on previous consoles. People will make the argument that you can just easily emulate them on your PC. Yeah, that is true. These games can run great on any modern computer or phones, and you have access to anything fan-made as well, like ROM hacks and stuff. Even graphical improvements can be done with N64 games, but I think it's a bad argument. The point is to play these games on Switch. The main reasons you get consoles is for the convenience and exclusive games. Otherwise, you can do a lot more things with a PC. You can even emulate modern Switch games if you want, but most people who can just don't. You have to be comfortable with piracy, know what you're doing, and set up a lot of things, including controllers, to get an authentic experience. Or, you could just play the games on the console you bought to play games. There's also the argument that legacy games should be sold like they were on the Wii, Wii U and 3DS, with Virtual Console. This is something I'm a bit more conflicted about. I much prefer buying games outright, knowing I'll own them forever. But then again, with this subscription, I've been able to play a lot more old games than I did on the Wii U. Ideally, there would be both on the Switch, but Nintendo wouldn't do that, and probably not even on the next console. The bulk of the content you're getting with Switch Online are these classic games, and giving you the option to just buy the games would devalue it. Then again, Game Pass exists alongside buying games individually, and it's incredibly popular. Other than the legacy game apps, you've got cloud saves which are genuinely useful. It's disappointing that there are weird exceptions that don't support it, but as far as I'm aware, the majority do. There's also all that great bonus content that I've talked about. However, there's still something holding Switch Online back from actually being decent, that being the social features, or rather, the lack of them. You'd think that after the outrage of the release of the mobile app and the 1-year delay, that Nintendo might actually be trying to make some improvements regarding this. But no, the app is still completely worthless for its primary purpose, and not much has been added to the Switch itself either. The invite feature Nintendo added is good, but it doesn't work well enough. At the start, it could only be used with one random third-party game, and now, some of Nintendo's games use it too, but it should just be standard for anything multiplayer. As far as I know, that's how it works on other consoles. You can send friend requests to strangers you've played with in games, but have no way to actually contact them again, and probably can't invite them to another game. So what's the point? In order to really make online worth it, issues like this need to be addressed. I have hopes that the next console will continue making improvements, as Nintendo said that this service will continue into the next generation, with them heavily investing in online. And what about the expansion pass? The expansion pass is harder to justify, and a lot of it comes down to the ridiculous price of it. I would say the DLCs make this a lot more valuable overall. The problem is, it varies based on what games you already own. The Octo expansion was added at some point, but I bought that in 2018, so it feels like I'm getting less out of what I'm paying for. At least the other DLCs were announced to be there from the start. And of course, you might not own any of the games that have DLC on the service. It's not like DLC can be played separate from the game. So if you're a person who just wants to play the extra legacy games, but don't have Mario Kart, Animal Crossing or Splatoon 2, then you're paying so much extra for nothing, and you can only take advantage of it properly by spending even more money. And that's it for the expansion pass. This thing costs twice as much as the initial price tier, but in my opinion, it provides much less relative value. It's not giving you an important feature like online play, and it shouldn't cost as much as it is right now. So while it's still overpriced, it has at least a good amount of content added over time to the legacy game apps. At launch, it was barely worth it at all, and I should have waited a bit before paying the extra money. But now I'm going to bring up the problem I mentioned earlier. The legacy games being added over time. The thing is, So much of this should have been there from the start. These are all games that have existed for a long time, and there's no reason it should take years for them to all become available on one console. It makes it feel like I got ripped off for the first year of Switch Online, and then again with the expansion pass. I get that the point is to keep new interest in the service, but it's such a lazy way to do it. I'm not saying every game should have been there the whole time. Obviously there is work that needs to be done, involving the emulators and getting the rights sorted out. But it should have been more of a priority, considering this service launched over a year and a half after the Switch was out, and many of these games can't be bought on other platforms. People paid the same price in 2018 for 20 NES games as they did in 2023 for 140 games from 3 different consoles. It would help if they were at least consistent with additions, but no, the monthly updates stopped after a year. What are the chances that the Switch 2 just starts from the beginning with just Donkey Kong and Excitebike again? Thankfully, I don't think that will be the case, but you never know. Again, this is specifically a problem I have with the classic game selection. Other additions coming over time makes sense, even if some of them should have been around earlier. There's something I haven't talked about yet regarding value, and that's the family memberships. If you fill up the subscription with 8 members and split it evenly, that can get the price down to less than £4 per year for the base subscription, and £7.50 per year for the expansion pass. This deal is honestly amazing, and I'd recommend anyone who can easily do it to do so. If you're paying this little, then they're both absolutely worth it. Unfortunately, not everyone is going to be able to do this though, so I can't really use it to justify the high price of solo subscriptions. Maybe that's how Nintendo looks at it. So how can Nintendo improve Switch Online going forwards? The Switch Online app needs a lot of attention. Even Nintendo seems to have stopped caring about its main purpose. The online lounge mode in Splatoon 2 that was made to integrate with the app was removed from the game, and a recent official advert showed people using a normal phone call to talk to their friends while playing. I'm not sure if recent online games even support voice chat anymore. The newish edition of being able to see your friends online is a step in the right direction, and they need to take it further like Xbox and PlayStation have done. Add messaging, inviting, account management, and maybe even the eShop. All this and voice chat should be built into the console too. Since Switch Online is going to continue with the Switch's successor, which will likely be backwards compatible, then all current games on the service should carry over, so all 6 legacy game apps with all the same games inside, as well as Tetris and F-Zero 99, if they're still around. Having any kind of reset would be terrible. It's taken years to get all this content, and Nintendo is likely going to prioritize making a smooth transition to the next generation. Chances are, they're holding back a lot of things planned for the service in preparation for the Switch 2. They do this with games as well. They slow down with big game releases at the end of a generation to give the next one a big head start, and introducing a bunch of long-awaited additions for Switch Online would really add to the hype when it's all announced. They could be planning more 99 games, or even something different you'd get for free. Super Mario Bros. 99 would probably be received well, and that way, Mario 35 was still an exclusive, anniversary celebrating limited time game. In addition to legacy games, maybe subscribers could get exclusive access to Nintendo mobile games on the console. That seems like something they might do. Also GameCube games. It's about time they start to think about Wii games as well. The problem is, they can still just port and remaster these Wii games, and they'll still sell amazingly, but we can still hope. Depending on what form the next console takes, DS and 3DS games might be possible as well. I'm sure the main reason DS games aren't on Switch already is just that it wouldn't be the best playing experience. On the Wii U Virtual Console, there was the option to have both DS screens side by side on the gamepad, so it should be possible on the Switch. If you add Game & Watch and even arcade games, then you could have the best Virtual Console of any Nintendo system, all as part of the online subscription. To add some more value to the expansion pass, maybe do a premium version of game trials. The trials could last longer, or cycle through some more expensive and notable games compared to what the base tier offers. Here's a potential solution to the DLC problem. What if you could get one DLC of your choice? That way, Nintendo still has some control over it, and it would be quite enticing for newcomers. There's probably a lot of people who didn't get the expansion pass, but still buy the DLC that was added to it, and getting to choose one of the DLCs you get could be something that makes it worth it for many. One last suggestion I have is themes. People have been asking for themes for so long, but it doesn't look like the Switch is going to get them in the end. We even made a whole video about it, but if it's true that Nintendo's saving things for the next console, themes would be a nice addition for new subscribers. These could be part of the same thing as the My Nintendo profile pictures, so you can buy them with platinum points. Nintendo charged real money for them on the 3DS, but I don't really see them doing that again, and adding them to the subscription would be a great fit. There's a lot more things that they could add, but really if they keep going at this rate, then most people would be satisfied. The thing is, Despite it being, at least in my opinion, not worth it at first, millions of people did not care and bought it anyway. Even I did the same, though to be fair, going without online play would be terrible. But then basically the same situation happened with the expansion pass, and Nintendo seems happy with how that's going. I really think it needs additions, and I'm sure they'll come. So as of now, yeah, Switch Online's worth it. And really it always was, if you wanted to get the most out of your Switch. And if you really want some GBA and N64 games, it's not the worst deal in the world. In fact, it's cheaper than buying the originals probably. Thanks for watching, and click here to find out what's next for Mario Kart. It's my best video I've ever made and is very different to this one. And subscribe for more.